What happens when an airline ignores injustice until a kid with no law degree speaks louder than any adult on board? The tension in the airplane cabin was thick enough to slice with a plastic knife. Passengers sat frozen, their seatbelts fastened, but their attention unbuckled, drawn magnetically to the small figure standing in the aisle. His feet were planted shoulder-width apart like a miniature lawyer making an opening statement. He looked all of 8 years old because he was... Jasper Carter may have been small in stature, but his presence filled row 22 and the surrounding space like a closing argument in a packed courtroom. His mother, Danielle Carter, remained seated, eyes wide in disbelief. Just moments earlier, she had tried quietly, respectfully, to explain that the woman across the aisle had a legal right to keep her medical device in place. But the flight attendant wouldn't hear it. And now Jasper was standing up. "According to the Air Carrier Access Act of 1986, he said, voice clear and unwavering. Specifically Title 14, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 382.87. This woman has the legal right to be accompanied by her medical device without additional charges or required seating changes." He spoke with the confidence of someone who had studied, cross-referenced, and printed every relevant statute, which, in fact, he had. From his dinosaur-themed backpack, Jasper pulled out a folded packet of documents. "Furthermore," he added, "the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination in places of public accommodation. This includes commercial aircraft operated by your airline. So unless you'd prefer to explain this to the Air Carrier Access Act compliance officer, I recommend we de-escalate." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. The white-haired businessman in first class lowered his Wall Street Journal. The college students 2 rows back stopped whispering. Even the crying baby in 14C went quiet. The flight attendant's face turned crimson. "Young man," she stammered, "I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly," Jasper interrupted. "Would you like to review the documentation, or should we proceed to contact your supervisor?" Behind him, Danielle rose slowly from her seat. Her heart was pounding. Not from fear, but from disbelief, pride, and if she was honest, anxiety. What would they do to him? What would they do to her? But Jasper didn't falter. His posture, his voice, his command of the Lowit was as if he had been preparing for this moment his entire life. In a way, he had. His eyes locked on the stunned flight attendant. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. A second attendant whispered something in her ear. Around them, passengers began murmuring. Phones discreetly angled to record. And still Jasper stood tall. Danielle placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "Honey," she whispered, "it's okay, you made your point." But Jasper wasn't finished. "This isn't about being right," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "It's about protecting the rights of people who often get ignored. Just because someone wears a uniform doesn't mean they're above the law." The woman with the medical device, a middle-aged black woman with weary eyes and a quiet dignity, blinked back tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Grace Howard," she said softly. "Most people just call me Kat." "I'm Jasper Carter," he replied, with the kind of formal precision that made Danielle's chest swell. It's a statistical fact that people are less likely to advocate for themselves when confronted by authority. I'm just making sure the facts are understood. The flight attendants huddled. Then one stepped away and picked up the cabin phone, likely to call the captain. The other turned back, her expression noticeably shifted. Not exactly friendly, but no longer dismissive. "Miss Howard," she said, "we've reviewed your situation and will accommodate your device as required. We apologize for the confusion." Murmurs of approval flowed through the rows. A light smattering of applause came from somewhere near the back. Grace nodded slowly. "Thank you. I appreciate the reconsideration." Then the flight attendant turned back to Jasper. "Young man," she said tightly, "in the future, please remain in your seat during official airline procedures. Let the staff handle passenger issues." Jasper considered this for a moment. I understand the importance of procedure, he said seriously, but as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once wrote, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Sometimes justice requires interruption. That was the moment the cabin broke into real applause. Danielle didn't stop her son this time. She couldn't. He had spoken the truth, not just the legal truth, but the moral one. And he had done it with clarity, compassion, and strength. As they walked back to their row, passengers smiled and nodded. An elderly man reached out to pat Jasper's shoulder. By the time they returned to seats 22A and B, a familiar face was waiting. Logan Pierce, the sharply dressed attorney who had taken interest in Jasper's keen legal observations earlier in the flight. That, Logan said, his voice low but warm, was extraordinary. Jasper shrugged, though his ears turned pink. I was just stating the facts. Facts don't care about age. Logan let out a short laugh. Many lawyers spend decades learning that. You, my young friend, are going to go far. Jasper tilted his head, considering. Law is currently third on my career list, after astrophysics and neurosurgery. Danielle covered her mouth to keep from laughing. But inside, she was glowing. This was her son, her brilliant, intense, justice-driven son. And today, at 30,000 feet, he had done more than win an argument. He had reminded everyone on that plane what courage looks like. It's not about shouting the loudest. It's about knowing the rules and standing up when someone tries to break them. Even if you're only 8 years old. 2 days before Flight 2187, Danielle Carter sat at her modest kitchen table in Chicago, the spring breeze drifting through a cracked window, bringing with it the scent of blooming magnolia and something heavier regret. Her laptop sat open in front of her, the glow of the screen casting a pale light across her tired face. She'd been staring at the same email for 20 minutes, rereading it like the words might change if she looked long enough. Mom's not doing well, Danny. The doctors say it's only a matter of days. If you want to say goodbye, you need to come now. I know things have been tight since Andre left. I can help with the tickets. Please, she's asking for you. And Jasper. Rachel Danielle swallowed hard, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She hadn't spoken to her mother, Margaret Carter, in nearly 3 years, not since the blow-up after her divorce. Words were said that cut deep. On both sides, and pride, that bitter glue, had held the silence together ever since. Mom, are you okay? Danielle looked up to see her son Jasper standing in the doorway, his oversized NASA t-shirt hanging loosely on his frame, his dark eyes full of concern. He was only 8, but he had always felt older than his years. He watched the world like it was a puzzle to be solved, and sometimes, like he was the only one willing to do the work. I'm fine, baby, Danielle said quickly, brushing away a tear. Just reading something from Aunt Rachel. Jasper brightened a little. Is she still working on quantum encryption? With the supercomputers? Danielle managed a tired smile. She is, but she wrote about Grandma. The light in Jasper's eyes dimmed. He walked to the table slowly, processing the unspoken shift in the air. Is Grandma Margaret going to die? Danielle didn't flinch at the question. Jasper had never been one for euphemisms or sugarcoating. He preferred clarity, no matter how uncomfortable. The doctors think, yes, soon. Jasper nodded slowly, his mind already moving. Then we need to go see her. Danielle sighed, heart aching at the simplicity of his logic. It's complicated, Jasper. The tickets are expensive. I'd need to take time off work, and your grandma and I haven't really spoken in a long time. But she's dying, he said matter-of-factly. According to Doc. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, denial is the first stage of grief. You're avoiding the emotional implications because you're afraid. Danielle blinked at him. When did you start reading about grief? Last month. After Mr. Wilson's dog died, he looked really sad during chess club. I wanted to understand how to help him. Danielle pressed a hand to her mouth, overcome by a mix of admiration and sorrow. There was so much of her in Jasper, her intensity, her empathy, but also so much of someone she used to be before the world wore her down. Aunt Rachel says she can help with the tickets, she admitted. Jasper nodded decisively. Then we should accept her help. It's not charity. It's family, like in the Giving Tree. Danielle tilted her head. The Shel Silverstein book? Yes. The tree gives everything to the boy because it loves him. Aunt Rachel wants to give us this chance because she loves us, and because she probably needs us too. Danielle let out a soft laugh. You make a strong case, counselor. Jasper's eyes sparkled at the reference. He had fallen in love with the law last summer after discovering a bin of old Law Order DVDs at a garage sale. Since then, he'd read everything from landmark Supreme Court cases to a children's version of the Constitution. He even mediated playground disputes during recess. So, we're going? He asked. Danielle nodded slowly. Yeah, we're going. I'll email Rachel now. Jasper tapped the table twice like a gavel. Motion granted. The next 36 hours were a blur. Danielle requested emergency family leave from her accounting job. Jasper packed his suitcase with methodical care, choosing 5 law books, 2 notebooks, and a small folder labeled Emergency Regulations, Federal Transport Law. Their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds, promised to water the plants. By Thursday morning, they were standing in the check-in line at O'Hare Airport, Danielle running on coffee and nerves. Jasper, in contrast, was buzzing with excitement. Did you know commercial airplanes fly at an altitude of 35,000 feet? He asked cheerfully. That's higher than Mount Everest. The air pressure is equivalent to standing on an 8,000-foot mountain. Danielle smiled. That's comforting. It is, Jasper insisted. It proves aviation safety is based on tested atmospheric data. Also, airplane windows are round because square ones used to crack under pressure. It caused 3 crashes in the 1950s. That's more comforting, Danielle said dryly. An elderly couple ahead of them turned around. The man raised his white eyebrows. Well, young man, you certainly know your stuff. Jasper nodded. I researched air travel extensively to reduce my mother's anxiety. The woman chuckled. You remind me of our grandson, David. Except he was more into dinosaurs than planes. Dinosaurs and planes are very different, Jasper replied. One is extinct. The other is regulated by the FAA. Danielle smiled apologetically. He's very detail-oriented. Not imagination, Mom. Research, Jasper corrected. They moved up in line. Danielle tried not to fidget. She hated flying, but she hated unspoken words even more now. Mom, Jasper whispered. Your heart rate is elevated. Try the 4-7-8 breathing technique, Doctor. Powell taught you. Danielle blinked. Then she inhaled for 4 seconds, held it for 7, and exhaled for 8. It helped. Better? Jasper asked. She nodded. Better. Did you pack my asthma meds in your carry-on? Yes. And my documentation? Yes. Jasper smiled. Good. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. Did you get that from a book? No. Coach Taylor says it at football practice. But it applies to air travel too. By the time they boarded, Jasper was practically vibrating. The terminal, the boarding bridge, the seat, she absorbed every detail like data for future reference. I'm ready, he said, gripping Danielle's hand. She looked down at him, the boy who read legal codes for bedtime, who remembered things she had forgotten, who carried his intelligence like a gift and a burden. I think I'm ready too, she replied. He nodded solemnly. We'll help each other. That's what family does. And with that, they stepped onto Flight 2187 to San Francisco, unaware of just how much would change before they touched ground again. The cabin of Flight 2187 to San Francisco was buzzing with the usual pre-takeoff shuffle passengers, stowing bags, snapping seatbelts, checking phones one last time before airplane mode took effect. Amidst the organized chaos, Danielle Carter and her son Jasper made their way down the narrow aisle toward their assigned seats, 22A and 22B. "I believe we are approximately 73% through the boarding process," Jasper noted, peering around at the half-filled cabin, "based on my observations of group numbers and overhead bin utilization." Danielle smiled as she squeezed his hand. "Let's just focus on finding our row, Professor." As they neared their seats, Danielle noticed a sharply dressed man already sitting in 22C, the aisle seat. He looked to be in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair impeccably styled, a tailored navy suit that seemed out of place in economy class, and a leather briefcase tucked beneath the seat in front of him. His attention was fixed on the tablet in his lap, fingers scrolling through lines of text. "Excuse me," Danielle said politely, "we're in the window and middle seats." The man looked up, clearly annoyed by the interruption. With a tight nod, he stood, not stepping into the aisle, just angling his body stiffly to make room. Danielle ushered Jasper in first, then squeezed past with a murmured, "Thank you," catching a faint whiff of expensive cologne. Once seated, Jasper craned his neck toward the man, eyes narrowing with curiosity. Then, in a voice just a little too loud for subtlety, he whispered, "He's reading corporate liability case law." "I can see the citation formatting." Danielle's eyes widened. "Jasper," she hissed softly, "remember what we said about respecting people's privacy?" "Right." "Sorry," Jasper replied, looking genuinely contrite. "I just find it fascinating." He pulled the safety card from the seat pocket in front of him and began examining it like it contained state secrets. Danielle took out her phone and sent a quick text to Rachel, letting her know they'd boarded. A moment later, Rachel replied, "Great, I'll pick you up at arrivals. Mom had a rough night, but she's stable this morning." "Love you both." Danielle stared at the last line. "Love you both." So simple, so heavy. It made her throat tighten. Just then the man beside them spoke, his tone dry but curious. "You're quite observant. For someone your age." Jasper looked up. "Are you a lawyer?" The man raised an eyebrow. "I am. Corporate litigation." "I thought so," Jasper said, matter-of-factly. "The citations on your tablet matched the format used in federal rulings." "And your watch is a Rolex Submariner. Statistically common among legal professionals in high-income brackets." Danielle blinked, unsure whether to apologize or laugh. The man stared for a beat, then let out a short chuckle. "You're not wrong. I'm Jasper Carter," the boy said, extending his hand with the formal air of a young attorney. The man accepted it, amused. "Logan Pierce." "Nice to meet you, Jasper. This is my mom, Danielle," Jasper added. Danielle smiled awkwardly. "He's got a broad range of interests." "I can see that," Logan said. "So, Jasper, what got you into the law?" Jasper leaned back slightly, folding his hands in his lap like a miniature judge. "I like rules, and I like when people follow them. But more than that, I like how the law tries to be fair even when people aren't." "That's a profound answer," Logan said, suddenly more attentive. Jasper brightened. "Are you familiar with Liebeck Varsbatsan Banoshish Oningen Delisors? McDonald's restaurants?" "Of course," Logan said, surprised. "It's often misrepresented as a frivolous lawsuit," Jasper explained. "But the actual case reveals gross negligence. The temperature of the coffee exceeded safe consumer standards. The plaintiff suffered third-degree burns." Logan tilted his head. "Most adults don't understand that case correctly." "How old are you again?" 8 years and 4 months. "And how many law books have you read?" 17, Jasper answered. "Not counting constitutional theory, which I classify separately." Danielle covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. Logan looked at her in awe. "He's extraordinary," she offered, a mix of pride and apology in her voice. "Clearly," Logan replied. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Jasper reached for Danielle's hand. The statistical probability of a commercial airline crash is 1 in 11 million, he said, eyes fixed out the window. I remember, she replied with a smile, but sometimes stats don't ease nerves. That's why exposure therapy is more effective than cognitive restructuring for specific phobias, Jasper added. Logan let out a low chuckle. I think I'm getting a free masterclass today. Once in the air, Logan put away his tablet and leaned slightly toward Jasper. Tell me more about your interest in law. Do you want to be a lawyer someday? I'm considering multiple career paths, Jasper replied thoughtfully. Law is currently ranked third, after astrophysics and neurosurgery, but I could combine them into a career in bioethics or regulatory science. That's ambitious. I like interdisciplinary applications. Danielle sipped her coffee and watched the exchange unfold. Her son, this brilliant, unusual child who never quite fit in with his peers, was holding his own in a conversation with a seasoned attorney. Not just holding his own, leading it. He's always been like this, she said quietly to Logan. Even as a toddler. He used to sort his crayons by wavelength. Logan smiled. He's not just bright, he has a moral compass. That's rare in any field. Jasper looked up. That's important, right? Having a moral compass? Logan nodded slowly. In law, it's everything. Danielle felt something shift inside her, not because her son was impressive, that had always been obvious, but because, for the first time, she saw someone from the world of adults, of power and prestige, see him too. See what she saw every day. A brilliant mind, yes, but also a compassionate one. A boy who cared deeply about doing what was right. As the flight continued, Logan and Jasper debated legal precedents, ethical dilemmas, and the philosophy of justice. Passengers walking past to use the restroom did double takes as they overheard phrases like Marbury v. Madison and substantive due process coming from row 22. And Danielle, she just listened, with a heart full of quiet pride. Her son didn't belong in a box. He belonged in a courtroom, or a laboratory, or maybe somewhere entirely new, somewhere the rules weren't just followed, but made better. Wherever he landed, one thing was clear. The world needed more minds and hearts like Jasper Carter. Flight 22187 had leveled out somewhere above Nebraska, the hum of the engines settling into a steady lull that was almost soothing. Jasper Carter had just finished explaining the legal philosophy behind Marbury v. Madison to Logan Pierce, who was now leaning back in his seat, visibly impressed, and if Danielle was honest, slightly overwhelmed. Across the aisle, Danielle sipped her coffee slowly, eyes flicking between her son and the clouds outside the window. She was starting to relax. Then it happened. A voice rose several rows ahead, sharper than the usual murmur of in-flight conversation. I specifically requested a seat accommodation. This is medical equipment, not an optional luxury. Danielle turned in her seat, just as many other passengers did. The voice belonged to a black woman in her 50s, seated about 10 rows ahead. Her expression was calm but determined. Her tone justifiably frustrated. A flight attendant stood beside her, arms folded, posture stiff. "Ma'am," the attendant replied, "I understand your frustration, but according to our records, no such request was documented. If you're unable to properly stow the device, it could be a safety issue." Danielle felt her stomach tighten. So did Jasper. He sat up straighter in his seat, his eyes locked on the scene like it was a courtroom drama. "That's a CPAP machine," he said quietly, identifying the device at the woman's feet. "Possibly with oxygen integration." "Jasper," Danielle said gently. "It's not our place." But Jasper's expression was shifting, his eyes narrowing, his lips pressing into a familiar line. "She's being discriminated against," he whispered. Danielle hesitated, torn between stopping him and letting him be who he was. The woman's voice rose again, Are you threatening to remove me from this flight? More passengers turned. A man in first class took off his noise-cancelling headphones. A baby 2 rows back stopped crying. The flight attendant replied, "We may need to consider alternative arrangements if the equipment continues to obstruct the aisle. It's a safety regulation." "That's not what the law says," Jasper muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Then he unbuckled his seatbelt. "Jasper," Danielle hissed, "what are you doing?" He turned to her, eyes clear and resolute. "Protecting someone's rights." Before she could stop him, he was in the aisle, walking toward the confrontation. His small frame moved with calm purpose, as if he belonged there. Danielle scrambled to unbuckle her own belt, heart pounding. "Excuse me," Jasper said, his voice not loud, but firm. The flight attendant turned, caught off guard by the sight of an 8-year-old boy standing between her and the woman in the window seat. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Jasper continued. According to the Air Carrier Access Act of 1986, Title 14 CFR, Part 382.87, passengers with medical devices must be reasonably accommodated without additional charges or discriminatory seating changes. The attendant blinked. "Young man, please return to your seat. This doesn't concern you." "With respect, it does concern me," Jasper replied evenly. "Because what you're doing is a violation of federal law." Danielle reached him then, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Jasper, please." But he gently shook his head and stepped forward. "I have the printed regulations here," he said, pulling a folded packet from his dinosaur backpack. "Would you like to review them, or should we request your supervisor and the airline's Air Carrier Access Act compliance officer?" The cabin fell silent. The woman in the window seat blinked, then chuckled softly, half disbelief, half awe. "He's right. That's exactly what I was trying to say. I'm Grace Howard," she added. "I use a CPAP with supplemental oxygen. I notified your airline days ago." The flight attendant glanced toward her colleague, who had just joined the scene, then back at Jasper. "I understand your concern," the senior attendant said, more cautiously now. "But we're simply following safety procedures." "Federal law supersedes internal airline policy," Jasper replied. "And the Americans with Disabilities Act further prohibits discrimination in public accommodations, which includes this aircraft." A few rows back, someone clapped. Then another. It rippled forward, a soft wave of approval. The senior attendant stiffened. "Perhaps we can continue this discussion in private." "I'm comfortable discussing it here," Grace said, voice calm but strong. "Unless you're ready to honor the accommodation I requested and was promised." The attendants huddled briefly. Then the senior one reached for the cabin phone. Danielle glanced at Logan, who had left his seat and stood nearby, arms crossed, watching everything unfold. He gave her a small nod of respect. After a few tense minutes, the attendant returned. "Miss Howard, we've confirmed your request in the system. Your equipment is cleared. We apologize for the inconvenience." Grace nodded with grace. "Thank you." Then she turned to Jasper. "I don't know who you are, young man, but you just saved me from a humiliating and illegal situation." "I'm Jasper Carter," he said, voice steady. "And I believe in making sure the rules protect people, not hurt them." The attendant looked at him with reluctant admiration. "In the future, please remain seated during such matters." Jasper didn't flinch. Sometimes justice requires interruption. As Dr. King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Danielle wasn't sure whether to cry or cheer. She walked him back to their row, hand on his shoulder. As they passed, passengers smiled. One man leaned out and said, "You've got a good head on your shoulders, son." Back in 22A and 22B, Logan was waiting. "That," he said, "was remarkable." Jasper shrugged, cheeks flushing. "It was just the law." "No," Logan replied, his voice low and firm. "It was justice. There's a difference, and you understand it better than most lawyers I know." Jasper looked down. "I hope I helped her." "You did," Danielle whispered, squeezing his hand. "You helped all of us." Because in that moment, 80,000 feet above the world, one small voice had reminded an entire airplane what compassion, courage, and knowing your rights really meant. The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 2187 cruised high above the Rockies, casting a bluish glow over rows of sleepy passengers. Most were dozing, earbuds in, heads tilted against windows or travel pillows. But in seat 12A, Grace Howard remained wide awake. She stared at the clouds beyond the window, her thoughts a storm of their own. She hadn't meant to make a scene. Years of being overlooked had taught her how to blend in, how to make herself small. But sometimes, just sometimes, you reached your limit. And tonight, it was a boy. An 8-year-old boy, of all people, who stood up for her. She looked down at the small folded packet of regulations, now tucked neatly in her carry-on. Jasper Carter, she whispered to herself, shaking her head with a smile. What kind of child memorizes federal code? A gentle tap on her elbow startled her. She turned to find Jasper himself, standing in the aisle with a polite but hopeful expression. "Hi, Miss Howard. Sorry to bother you. May I sit here for a minute?" Grace blinked. "Of course, baby. Yes, of course." He slipped into the empty seat beside her, his legs swinging slightly above the floor. "Thank you again," she said softly. "For earlier, you really knew your stuff." Jasper smiled. "I just said what needed to be said." Sometimes grown-ups forget what fairness looks like. Grace tilted her head, studying him. "And you haven't forgotten?" "No," Jasper said, shaking his head, "because my grandma taught me what fairness feels like." Grace's expression softened. "Your grandma must be a special woman." Jasper nodded solemnly. "Her name is Margaret Carter. She's very smart. And very stubborn. She sounds like someone I'd like." "She used to be a school principal," Jasper said proudly. "When I was little, she'd quiz me on vocabulary words during breakfast. If I got one wrong, I had to use it in a sentence during lunch." Grace chuckled. "Tough love." She called it preparing me for the world. I think she knew the world wasn't always going to be fair to someone like me. Grace's smile faded slightly. "Someone like you. You know," he said matter-of-factly. "Brown skin. Big words. No dad around. Some people think all that means you won't go far." Her heart clenched. "And now?" she asked gently. "Now she's dying," Jasper said, voice quieter. "We're going to see her in San Francisco. Aunt Rachel said it might be the last time." Grace reached out and placed a hand gently over his. "I'm so sorry, baby." Jasper stared straight ahead. "I'm scared she won't remember me. Or worse, that she'll still be mad at my mom." Grace waited. "My mom and grandma stopped talking a long time ago," he continued. "Something about choices and pride and things that happened before I was born. But I still remember grandma brushing my hair real slow before bed. She'd hum Amazing Grace, even though she couldn't sing." Grace chuckled softly. "That sounds like a real grandma." Jasper looked up at her. "I don't want her to leave this world thinking my mom didn't care, or that I didn't care." Grace nodded, eyes suddenly wet. "That's a heavy thought for someone your age." "I think about a lot of things," Jasper said. "Especially when it's quiet, like now." They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the engines surrounding them like a soft cocoon. "Miss Howard," he said quietly, "do you think people always get a second chance?" Grace leaned back in her seat, the question settling deep in her bones. "Not always," she said slowly, "but I think when they do, they better take it." Jasper nodded. "I hope my mom takes hers." Grace squeezed his hand. "I think she already did," she said. "She brought you." A few rows back, Danielle Carter watched her son with quiet wonder. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their voices carried just enough. She saw the way Grace leaned in, the way Jasper talked like he'd lived 100 lives, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she let herself hope. Hoped that she hadn't ruined everything with her mother. Hoped that Jasper would be more than fine, he'd be exceptional. When Jasper returned to his seat, he leaned into her shoulder and whispered, "I think Miss Howard needed someone to listen." Danielle kissed the top of his curls. "And you were that someone?" He nodded. "It made me feel useful." Danielle smiled. "You are useful." "And kind and strong and everything Grandma would be proud of." Jasper looked up. "Even if she doesn't say it?" Danielle swallowed the lump in her throat. "Even then." Back in seat 12A, Grace stared out the window again, but this time the clouds didn't feel so heavy. The wheels of Flight 2187 screeched gently against the tarmac at San Francisco International, and the cabin erupted into the usual chaos of phones buzzing to life, seatbelts clicking open, and passengers reaching for overhead bins like treasure hunters. But for Jasper Carter, none of that registered. He sat still, backpack hugged tightly against his chest, his gaze fixed straight ahead. "Mom," he whispered, "do you think she's still awake?" Danielle Carter turned to him, her heart breaking at the question. "She's been waiting all day," she said softly. "I think she'll wait a little longer." It wasn't a promise, it was a prayer. At baggage claim, they spotted Rachel Carter instantly. Her auburn curls were pulled back in a tight ponytail, a Stanford hoodie hanging loose over jeans. She looked exhausted, but when her eyes landed on Jasper, they lit up like a city skyline. "Hey!" she called, arms open. Jasper ran into her hug with surprising force for a boy who usually measured his actions like a chess move. "You got taller," Rachel said, pulling back to look at him, "and heavier." "It's the backpack," Jasper replied. "I packed federal codes." Rachel laughed. "Of course you did." Then she looked up at Danielle. The two sisters stood in silence for a long moment. There was no dramatic music, no tears, just a quiet reckoning. "Thanks for coming," Rachel said at last. Danielle nodded. "Thanks for reaching out." It wasn't a full bridge, but it was a start. The drive to Lexington Medical Center was quiet. Rachel drove. Danielle stared out the window. Jasper sat in the back seat, reciting deep breaths, the kind his school counselor had taught him for anxiety. "When we get there," Rachel said as they pulled into the hospital garage, "just be ready. She's not the same. Her voice is softer. She forgets things. Sometimes she's confused. But this morning she asked about you both." Danielle's grip on the door tightened. "She asked about me," she said. Rachel nodded. She even remembered Jasper's favorite cereal. "Still calls it that cinnamon thing in the red box." "Cinnamon O's," Jasper whispered. Inside the hospital, the lights were too white, the halls too clean, the smell of antiseptic mixed with something far heavier finality. Jasper clutched Danielle's hand as they took the elevator to the 6th floor. He glanced around nervously at the other patients, the nurses pushing carts, the flickering monitors through cracked doorways. "Is she scared?" he asked quietly. "I think she's just tired," Danielle replied. Room 617. Rachel pushed open the door slowly. There she was, Margaret Carter. Once a woman of posture and presence, now lying small in a sea of white sheets and soft beeping machines. Her eyes were closed. A sliver of sunlight spilled across her frail frame. Her hands, once so quick to correct homework or flip pancakes, now lay motionless, veins like threads beneath translucent skin. "Mom?" Danielle whispered, stepping forward. No answer. Rachel touched her mother's shoulder gently. "Mama, they're here." Margaret stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. "Rachel," she croaked, "I'm here, and so is Danny." "And Jasper." At the sound of his name, Jasper stepped forward, barely breathing. Margaret turned her head slowly, her gaze struggling to focus. Then just for a flicker, her eyes locked with his. "Is that my boy?" she whispered. Jasper nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, Mom." "It's me," she smiled, weak but genuine. "You still got those serious eyes, like your mama." "Always thinking." Danielle stepped closer. "Hi, Mom." For a moment they just looked at each other. So much unsaid. So much time lost. "I didn't think you'd come," Margaret finally said, voice barely audible. "I didn't think you'd want me," Danielle replied. Margaret exhaled a raspy breath. "I always wanted you. I just didn't know how to stop being right long enough to say it." A tear rolled down Danielle's cheek. "You don't have to say anything. Just rest." But Margaret shook her head slowly. "No. I need to say it, while I still can." She turned her head toward Jasper. "That boy, he's the best thing either of us ever did." Jasper smiled, tears brimming. "He stood up for someone on the plane," Danielle said, sitting beside her mother. "Knows more law than most adults. He gets that from you." Margaret's lips twitched. "He gets the stubborn part, too." They stayed for hours. Jasper read aloud from a book his grandmother used to read to him years ago. Danielle brushed her mother's hair with soft practice strokes. Rachel stepped out to grab coffee and never went far. And when Margaret finally drifted into sleep again, Jasper stayed beside her, his small hand resting gently on hers. "Mom," he whispered. "Do you think she can hear us, even when she's sleeping?" Danielle nodded. "I think so. Then I'm going to tell her everything I didn't get to say yet, just in case." And he did. He talked about school, about the time he won the spelling bee with jurisprudence, about how he once helped his classmate fight a parking ticket her mom got downtown. He talked about missing her pancakes, about how he sometimes still hummed Amazing Grace when he couldn't fall asleep. And Danielle, watching from the chair in the corner, realized something quietly devastating. This little boy, this old soul in a child's body, was not afraid of goodbye. He wasn't pretending his grandmother would live forever. He wasn't sugarcoating the truth, but he was making peace, in his own way, in her own time. That night, as they left the hospital, Jasper looked up at the stars outside the parking structure and said, "If love were a light, she'd still be shining." Danielle blinked back tears. "She is, baby. She always will be." And deep in room 6117, even as the machines beeped slower, even as the night crept in, Margaret Carter smiled in her sleep, because some part of her did hear, and that part was at peace. The morning sun filtered gently through the blinds of room 6117, casting soft stripes of gold across the bedsheets and the still figure beneath them. Margaret Carter hadn't stirred in hours. A nurse. Miss Thelma checked her vitals quietly, her practiced hands gentle as feathers. "Still stable," she murmured to Danielle, who sat curled in a chair, clutching a lukewarm cup of hospital coffee. "She looks so far away," Danielle whispered, voice cracking. "She's not gone," Thelma replied kindly. "Not yet. Sometimes the soul just needs a reason to stay a little longer." Across the room, Jasper sat at the windowsill, his favorite book resting on his lap, unread. He had tried everything the night before, stories, memories, even his rendition of Amazing Grace in a whisper. But his grandmother had remained still, her breath slow, mechanical. He glanced at his mum, then back at the frail figure in the bed. And then, quietly, he stood. He walked over to Margaret's side, resting his small hand over hers. Her fingers didn't move. "Grandma," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" Danielle stirred in her seat, glancing up. "I know people say when someone's really sick, they can still hear, and even if they can't answer, their heart does. So I'm going to ask anyway." He swallowed. "When you were my age, were you scared too?" The silence hung heavy. Danielle stood slowly, crossing the room. But then, a twitch. Subtle, barely there, but enough. Jasper's eyes widened. "Mom!" Margaret's eyelids fluttered. Then, they opened. Her gaze, cloudy at first, struggled to find light. But when it landed on Jasper, those wide, searching eyes, it cleared like mist. "You," she whispered. Jasper leaned closer, gripping her hand gently. I'm here. Danielle let out a shaky breath and stepped to the other side of the bed. Margaret turned toward her. You too, Danielle nodded, her lips trembling. We're both here, Mama. Margaret's voice was a rasp, fragile as tissue paper. You asked if I was scared. Jasper nodded. When I was 8, she continued, I used to hide behind the church organ during thunderstorms, told everyone I was brave, but my hands shook. Jasper smiled softly. Me too. Not the organ part, but the hands. Margaret chuckled weakly. Smart boys don't always feel safe in loud worlds. Danielle's face twisted with emotion. You're awake, she whispered. Not for long, Margaret said, her honesty piercing, but long enough. Her eyes drifted between them. I need to say it, while my mind is still mine. Danielle nodded, tears streaking silently. I was wrong, Margaret whispered. About how I judged you, Danny, about walking away. I thought I was protecting Jasper. But I let pride dress up as wisdom. Danielle reached down, brushing her mother's hair back. You were scared. Margaret blinked. So were you. They both laughed, tired, cracked, but real. Do you forgive me? Margaret asked, voice barely audible. I do, Danielle whispered, pressing her forehead to her mother's. Then, with trembling effort, Margaret turned to Jasper. Promise me something. He leaned in. Don't let this world make you small. Speak big. Even when they tell you to be quiet. Jasper nodded, fiercely now. I promise. She smiled. And when you win your first case, I want my name on the brief. You'll be on the first page, he said. In bold. They stayed like that, the three of them, tangled in touch and time, for 20 minutes, maybe 30. No one spoke. No one needed to. Then Margaret's breathing grew softer, shallower. The machines didn't beep in alarm, just gently registered what everyone in the room already knew. Miss Thelma stepped in quietly, placed a hand on Danielle's shoulder. She waited for you, she whispered. For this. Jasper didn't cry. He pressed a kiss to his grandmother's hand and whispered, Thank you for everything. Danielle leaned into her son's shoulder, and together they watched the strongest woman either of them had ever known slip peacefully into memory. Later that day, as the hospital room emptied, Rachel arrived with flowers too late and apologies no one needed. She came back? She asked, stunned. Danielle nodded, eyes red but bright. Because Jasper asked a question. Rachel knelt down beside her nephew. What did you ask, kiddo? Jasper looked up. If she was scared when she was my age. Rachel blinked, tears forming. That's a good question. It was the only one that mattered, Jasper said. That night, back at Rachel's apartment, Jasper sat by the window again, staring at the stars. Danielle brought him a cup of warm milk. Hard day, she said. He nodded. But good, he added. Yeah? Because she remembered, and because she said she was proud of me. Danielle wrapped her arms around him. She always was. Jasper leaned into her side. I don't think people really die, if you remember the good parts. Danielle kissed his temple. Then your grandma's going to live forever. 3 days after Margaret Carter's funeral, the San Francisco air still smelled like rain. The service had been small, just close family, a few old neighbors, and one retired choir member who insisted on singing His Eye is on the Sparrow off-key. Danielle had cried quietly. Jasper hadn't said much, but he clutched the folded eulogy in his pocket like a sacred text. He'd written it himself. Now the house was still. The casseroles had been eaten. The flowers were wilting. And grief had begun to settle into corners like dust. That afternoon, while Danielle napped on the couch and Rachel folded leftover sympathy cards into a drawer, Logan Pierce knocked on the door. Jasper opened it. Mr. Pierce, he said, surprised. I thought you flew back to New York. I was supposed to, Logan said, loosening his tie. But something came up. Mind if I talk to your mom? She's asleep, Jasper said, but I'm available. Logan raised an eyebrow. That right? Jasper nodded. You look like someone who needs a second opinion. Logan chuckled. Actually, I do. They sat at the kitchen table, Logan pulling out a laptop and an envelope stuffed with papers. Client of mine, elderly woman, stroke survivor. Signed a lease on a senior apartment that jacks her rent by 38% mid-contract. Claims she didn't understand the fine print. Her niece sent me the documents yesterday. He slid the papers over to Jasper. The boy scanned them, brow furrowing. You want me to read this? He asked. You already won an argument at 30,000 feet, Logan said. Might as well see if lightning strikes twice. Jasper cracked a smile and began reading. The silence stretched for 10 minutes. Logan watched, fascinated, as Jasper traced clauses with a finger, murmured lines to himself, and flipped back and forth between pages like a mini law clerk. Finally, Jasper looked up. Section 12B, he said. The escalation clause. Logan leaned in. It's vaguely written and buried between unrelated subclauses about parking and pets. It doesn't specify the conditions for rent increase, just says it may be reassessed per market variables deemed reasonable by management discretion. That's subjective and unfair. Logan's eyebrows shot up. Also, Jasper added, they required her to initial it, but the placement of the signature box is 2 pages earlier. That's called contract obfuscation. Where on earth did you learn that term? Logan asked. I read Contracts for Dummies last summer, Jasper replied casually. Twice. Logan laughed. Well, you just spotted exactly what I was hoping you'd see. I think we've got a case. Jasper tilted his head. Isn't she protected under elder abuse statutes? She is, Logan said, but proving coercion is tricky. Unless, Jasper said, you show a pattern. Get testimonies from other tenants who signed similar leases. Logan's face shifted from amused to impressed. Kid, if I didn't know better, I'd say you were trying to get hired. Jasper leaned forward. Are you hiring? They both laughed. An hour later, Danielle woke up to find her son and a Manhattan lawyer in a full-scale legal brainstorm, documents spread across the kitchen table like war maps. Jasper, she said groggily, what are you doing? Helping Mr. Pierce sue a landlord, he replied. For justice. Danielle rubbed her eyes. Of course you are. The next day, Logan returned with a contract revision drafted and a plan in place to contact 2 former tenants. Jasper greeted him at the door with a fresh notepad and a sharpened pencil. You don't need to take notes, Logan said. I know, Jasper replied, but I want to remember this part. What part? The part where someone listens to me after the funeral. The part where life doesn't go back to pretending I'm just a kid. Logan paused. He knelt down to Jasper's eye level. Let me tell you something. In every courtroom I've ever stepped into, I've wished for one thing. Jasper blinked. A better judge? No, Logan said. Someone who cared about the truth more than winning. Jasper nodded slowly. Truth matters. It always does, Logan said, even when no one else is watching. That afternoon, Logan took a photo of Jasper holding the corrected lease, smiling like he'd just cracked a Supreme Court case. He sent it to a friend on the board of a local youth law initiative with the message, Meet Jasper Carter. 8 years old, already smarter than me. Later that night, Danielle sat with Jasper on the porch, a soft breeze rustling the old wind chimes their grandmother had hung long ago. You know, she said, I'm starting to wonder if Grandma left part of herself inside you. Jasper looked at her, puzzled. Not in a spooky way, she smiled, just in the way you speak up, the way you see people, the way you know what's fair, even when grown-ups don't. I think she left part of herself in all of us, Jasper said. He paused. And I think helping people like that lady, that's how we keep her alive. Danielle wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. "That," she whispered, "is exactly what she would have said." The invitation arrived in a crisp white envelope, sealed with a gold-embossed logo that shimmered under the kitchen light. Danielle Carter turned it over in her hands, puzzled. Then she slid her finger under the flap and unfolded the trifolded card. Youth Legal Voices Conference, Stanford Law School, Spring Session. Featuring Jasper Carter, age 8. Topic: Justice Starts Young. Danielle blinked. "Jasper," she called out, "did you apply for something at Stanford?" He walked in, munching a granola bar. "Nope, but I think Mr. Pierce may have. Of course." Logan Pierce. The Manhattan attorney had been raving about Jasper to his colleagues for weeks now, ever since the kid tore apart a shady lease agreement with nothing but a pencil and a highlighter. "I don't even have a suit," Jasper added. Danielle stared at the card. "You have a voice. That's enough." 3 weeks later, the Carter family arrived at Stanford Law's Grand Auditorium, a marble and glass temple of legal scholarship, filled with hundreds of sharply dressed law students, professors, and practicing attorneys. Jasper stood backstage, adjusting the bow tie he swore made him look like a tax accountant. "Do I really have to speak?" he asked, glancing through the curtain at the crowd. Danielle knelt down beside him. "You don't have to do anything, baby." "But if you speak from your heart, they'll listen," he nodded, quietly. And then the stage manager cued him. The room fell silent as an 8-year-old boy stepped up to the podium, barely tall enough to reach the microphone. He placed a stack of handwritten notes beside him. Then he didn't look at them. He looked at them and spoke. "My name is Jasper Carter. I'm 8 years old. I've never taken the bar exam. I've never filed a motion. I don't have a law degree. But I do know what injustice feels like. It feels like being told to stay silent when something is wrong, like watching someone get kicked out of first class for having brown skin, like watching your mum get turned away from a job because she took time off to take care of you, like seeing your grandma cry because the daughter she loves stopped calling. I learned that law isn't about big words or fancy degrees. It's about people. People who deserve to be heard. People who can't always fight for themselves. I stood up for a woman on a plane because no one else would. I helped a lawyer stop a landlord from tricking old people out of their homes, not because I'm special, but because I pay attention, because I care. And I think we need more people who care." You could have heard a pin drop. Even the seasoned litigators leaned forward. The dean of Stanford Law sat motionless, glasses in hand. "When my grandma passed away," Jasper continued, voice softer now, "I promised her I'd keep fighting for what's right. She said, 'Speak big, even when they tell you to be quiet.' So I'm here today, speaking big." Because justice doesn't start when you pass the bar. It starts when you notice unfairness and decide to do something about it. He stepped back. Silence. Then, thunder. A standing ovation rippled through the auditorium, first in the back, then the sides, then the entire room. Danielle wiped her eyes from the front row. Rachel stood beside her, hands over her heart. Logan Pierce, seated with the guest panelists, simply mouthed, "Told you so." After the talk, dozens of people came up to Jasper, lawyers, law students, even a retired judge who asked if he could quote him in an upcoming book. One student knelt and said, "You reminded me why I went into law school in the first place." Jasper smiled awkwardly. "Just don't forget." Later at the reception, as Jasper munched on chocolate-covered pretzels and avoided eye contact with people who called him remarkable, Logan came up and handed him a manila folder. "What's this?" Jasper asked. "Your first unofficial internship offer," Logan said. "Summer program, if you're interested." Jasper raised an eyebrow. "Do I get a desk?" Logan grinned. "You get a nameplate." Jasper's eyes widened. "I wanted to say Junior Truth Officer." "Done." That night, back in their hotel room, Jasper lay in bed staring at the ceiling. "Mom?" "Yeah, baby?" Was I brave today? Danielle turned off the light and lay beside him.
You were braver than half the people in that room, and smarter than most. He thought for a moment. Do you think Grandma heard it? Danielle closed her eyes, smiling in the dark.
I think she was sitting in the front row, with her arms crossed, whispering, "That's my boy." Jasper chuckled softly. Then, for the first time in weeks, he slept without waking. 3 months after the Stanford conference, Jasper Carter was back in his bedroom in Atlanta.
Posters of astronauts and courtroom sketches hung side by side on his wall, a strange mix of dreams for an 8-year-old. But Jasper wasn't like most kids. He never had been.
He sat at his little desk, scribbling in a spiral notebook labeled, "Things that aren't fair and what we should do about them." Outside, the summer breeze stirred wind chimes on the porch. Inside, the house was peaceful finally. Danielle was on the phone in the living room, helping a neighbor navigate a custody dispute. Ever since Jasper's speech, folks in their community had started turning to her too. Something had shifted, not just in their family but around them. One Saturday afternoon, while Jasper was organizing his evidence drawer, which included a flashlight, highlighters, and an old gavel his grandma once used as a paperweight, Danielle walked in holding a large envelope. "This came for you," she said. Jasper took it, tearing carefully across the edge. Inside was a letter printed on thick, formal paper. "Dear Jasper Carter, in recognition of your contributions to youth advocacy and legal literacy, we are proud to invite you to join the National Youth Justice Council as our youngest ever honorary advisor." He stared at it, blinking. "Is this real?" he whispered. Danielle smiled.
"As real as anything you've ever earned." A week later, Jasper stood in front of a group of 5th graders at a local community center. He wore a navy blazer 3 sizes too big and carried a stack of printed handouts titled, "Know Your Rights, even if you're not tall enough to ride the roller coaster." He cleared his throat. "Hi.
I'm Jasper, I'm 8, and I study justice." A girl in the front row raised her hand. "What's justice?" Jasper smiled. "Justice is when the rules protect everybody, not just people who are loud or rich." The kids leaned in. And Jasper told them the story of the plane ride, the lease, his grandma, Stanford. But more importantly, he told them that they mattered. He told them that fairness was something they were allowed to ask for, even demand. From there, it grew. Logan Pierce helped him launch a YouTube mini-series, Justice with Jasper, short videos explaining legal rights in kid-friendly language. Rachel built him a website. Danielle organized monthly youth forums at the library, and everywhere Jasper went, he carried 2 things in his backpack: a small photo of Margaret Carter and the original typed copy of his Stanford speech. He called them his compass and his voice. One day, while waiting outside a city hall meeting, Jasper sat beside a young girl holding a broken toy. Her name was Elena, and her landlord had thrown out her family's belongings during an illegal eviction. She looked up at Jasper with eyes full of confusion and fear. "My mom says we don't matter," she whispered. Jasper looked at her and said simply, "That's not true." And then he wrote her story down. He brought it to Logan. They filed a complaint. The press picked it up. And Elena's family not only got rehoused, they inspired a new ordinance to protect low-income renters across the city. Jasper didn't take credit. He just circled the date in his notebook and wrote, "Justice happened today." One evening, Danielle stood in the doorway of Jasper's room as he prepped for another talk. "Do you ever miss just being a regular kid?" she asked gently. Jasper looked up. "I am a regular kid," he said. "I just know what I want to be when I grow up." "And what's that?" He grinned. "The kind of lawyer Grandma would have been proud of. One who listens. One who stays. One who speaks big, even when the room is full of silence." Years would pass. Jasper Carter would go on to receive national awards, speak before Congress on youth protection laws, and eventually graduate first in his class from Yale Law School. But long before that, long before the applause and degrees, there was a little boy in a too big blazer, standing at a community center podium, explaining that justice wasn't a privilege for the powerful, but a promise to be defended by anyone, at any age. In a world where noise often drowns out truth, Jasper Carter's story reminds us that justice isn't about age or titles, it's about courage and heart. An 8-year-old boy, armed only with empathy and a sense of right and wrong, showed an entire room of legal experts that fairness begins when someone dares to speak up. For older generations, this message resonates even deeper. We are never too old to believe in change, and never too late to pass on values that matter. Jasper didn't just wake up one day knowing what justice meant. He inherited it from a grandmother who, even in her final moments, chose to speak love, truth, and forgiveness. His story teaches us that when we encourage young minds to question, to care, and to stand up not just for themselves but for others, we shape a future where justice is not just a word, but a way of living. And maybe the most powerful legacy we can leave is not in what we build or own, but in the voices we inspire, the values we instill, and the quiet belief that doing the right thing still matters in this world.